welcome to Nourishing the Mother, where inspired women talk about the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness. We ask, in what ways can we show up more fully, live more meaningfully, parent more wholly, and love more unconditionally? How can we mine the wisdom from the experiences of our lives and expand into those challenges? If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs, so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way. And if you feel like giving a little back to this free content, please become a patron of the show and receive extra member benefits for less than a coffee a month. Or you can leave a review on iTunes and Facebook, all of which helps the podcast keep going and reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul. Head on over to patreon.com/NTM podcast to find out more. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today we have an exceptionally special guest, Rhea Dempsey, who is with us. Would you like to say a quick hello?
Hi, everybody. So happy to be here. Love the theme of nourishing the mother. So needed, particularly at this time. So great to be here with you.
We're tickle pig. I'm actually like nervous. It's like a dream come true. I'm like, oh my God, I'm sitting with Rhea again. So you might have to just let me get over my nerves just for 5 minutes. So Bridgie might have to roll. Yeah. But what I would love to do is actually just let all of our listeners know your bio, who you are and what your journey has been, if for some reason they haven't heard of you. So I would love to let you know about that. So Rhea is a highly sought-after independent childbirth educator, trainer, speaker, counsellor, author, and doula, with experience at over 1,000 births. Rhea's understanding of birth has been gained over 4 decades of working with pregnant women, their partners, support people, midwives, and medical practitioners in homes and hospitals. She is recognised as an insightful commentator on the difficulties faced by women who have a yearning for a normal physiological birth in navigating the present birth culture. She is respected as one of Australia's foremost thinkers on the topic of working with pain, both physiological and psychological, in childbirth and its connection to normal physiological birth. She has presented locally, nationally, and internationally. In fact, she speaks passionately about birth issues anywhere, anytime. Rhea is also the author of 2 books, Birth with Confidence, Savvy Choices for Normal Birth, and her new book, Beyond the Birth Plan, Getting Real About Pain and Power. With regard to mothering, Rhea is the mother of 3 daughters, 2 home-born, and now grandmother to 5 home-born grandchildren. Long before it was named, Rhea's mothering included the key tenets of attachment parenting, long-term breastfeeding, co-sleeping, baby wearing, and conscious, respectful, developmentally sensitive guidance. And she delights in witnessing this generational patterning continue with her grandchildren. Which just is, can I just on a parenting note say, to hear the long-term experience of that as a mother who chooses those choices, and I'm sure Bridgie will feel the same, it's just feels like a blessing to even just receive those words, because sometimes we do all of this and I think, will it be anything? Will it end up anywhere? Will they make these choices? Like it's really heartwarming to hear that. So thank you also for that.
Thank you.
Beautiful, Rhea. So we thought we could just start by saying how we found you. And then, as you know, we're going to hit you up with a heck ton of questions. So I hope you're strapped in. So I met you in 2008. It would have been. Can you believe it's been that long ago?
Yeah.
And I came to you to sit in circle with you for a year and train under your guidance. And it was one of the most magnificent experiences of sitting in circle with a matriarch that I still talk about as being pivotal. And trained to be a doula under your guidance, which was, again, one of the deepest, most profound moments of my life where it changed its trajectory, and I learnt ways of being and experiences of life that I hadn't known up until that point. So your guidance has had an enormous impact on my life, and I'm sure by virtue of that on the lives of many women that I've touched as a result of that as well. So I'm incredibly grateful to be having this moment with you too. And Bridgie?
And I was thinking as you're talking, I'm thinking, unfortunately, I actually came across you after the birth of my first child. I would have liked to have said it was fortunate. And it was with your first book, and it just sung to my soul because it hit every edge that I had met in my first birthing experience in hospital, which on the whole was a fairly good hospital birth, all things considered. But your book really, really just reminded me of everything that I'd forgotten that was the truth of who I was as a birthing woman. And we met actually about 2 years ago when I was about 2 minutes pregnant with my third baby, and you stood next to me and just spouted such wisdom as a speaker on a film event that I did, which was a film called These Are My Hours, and it's all about a home birth. And I like to think that the imprint of your words and that container of energy and inspiration was what gave me the most profound birthing experience of my life with my third born at home last year. So deeply touched by your work and your wisdom, and certainly through my relationship with Jules, who has been so profoundly influenced by your work too. So deep gratitude, Rhea. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we have to be grateful for all those births and babies that have taught me a whole lot. Particularly about birth, but if you learn a bit about birth, you learn a bit about life, yeah? So
deeply true. So I would love maybe for you to just quickly share, Rhea, how you have come to being at 1,000 births and being passionate about physiological and psychological pain and getting real about it in this culture.
Yeah. So my first baby, who is now also my editor, which is so helpful, was born in England in one of the large teaching hospitals there. And just to backtrack, so my background before I had my first baby was I was a physical education teacher and an outdoor adventure sort of facilitator. So used to working, fit and strong and healthy, working with my own body, and also not only educating, but that sort of facilitating, with people who are doing high ropes courses or abseiling down cliffs and what have you. There's quite an element of not only the physical technique and trusting bodies and what have you, but there's quite an element of psychological support that's required as well. So I just like to put that in because it really is a foundation to where I've come to in terms of what I talk about birth now. So I went into that birth with that gorgeous first baby of mine thinking, I'm healthy and well. Birth's a body event. I'm very in tune with my body and it's a challenging event. People talk about pain. This was in the era of natural birth. So certainly I was wanting to, a natural birth at that point really was talking about just without drugs. So that was certainly fit with me and who I thought I was at that point. There was just the start in England. I'm actually Australian, but I was over there when I had my first baby. It was the start a little bit of childbirth education in the hospitals, but what that meant was like about 200 couples or something in a large auditorium with obstetricians up the front telling us basically what happened, how it worked here. And I remember standing up in that and asking, because I'd done a little bit of reading, did they do routine episiotomies in this hospital? That was my because I felt like the birth itself was just going to be a breeze for me, well, if not a breeze, but certainly I was on the case about it. And the obstetrician answered the questions, said, no, we don't do routine episiotomies here. So to move forward with that, eventually the birth, not only did it not unfold as I had hoped, in that the birth, there are a number of things, and I've written about this in both books actually, but on reflection now, looking back at it, with the heightened awareness of birth trauma and sort of obstetric violence in a way that's happening now, I would look back on that birth and see that there are elements of punitive behaviour and a whole lot of other things as well. She was born, gorgeous baby. It was in the era where mothers and babies were separated from one another for a good 8 hours, and mothers were drugged so that they could get a good sleep. When I came out of that and eventually connected with my daughter and stayed in hospital for a day or so, I had an episiotomy, and I just was chatting. It was in the large, the older hospital situation with a large 12-bed ward, with just our curtains around between us. It created quite a feeling of support for one another, actually. There's lots of great chat across the beds and everything. But one of the things that I started to talk about was asking people if they had the episiotomy, and of the 12 women on the ward, 10 had had episiotomies and 2 had had Caesars. So that, I sort of came out of that. It was like these little pings of, what is this? And of course that's, there are other factors in it, but I felt like coming through her birth experience, I was really quite radicalised around some of those issues and how that was for her and for me, and the things that I had thought were going to be part of that story didn't end up being part of that story, and other things that I thought were not routine were routine, and so on and so on. So waking up, we then came back to Australia, and luckily for me, I had some friends who'd had babies in birth centres and then were on the edges of the home birth scene, and so it wasn't really out of some deep calling for, I don't know, some deeper surrender to birth that a home birth would provide. My initial choice about a home birth for my second baby was that I didn't know. I didn't want to go back in and face a hospital where those sorts of routines, or I was being told things. I didn't know whether I would have that sort of internal capacity to say no and to shape that course again. So it was more of a fear or an anxiety about being in a hospital where I felt some of those same things might happen and I wouldn't be able to defend myself, and neither my partner, rather than so the home birth felt like it was safer from the point of view of being protected from that. It wasn't until after I experienced that birth with that second baby that then, of course, the glory of home birth, and not only home birth, I guess it's the glory of normal physiological childbirth, where it's happening undisturbed. It's just that home birth offers that much more readily, but I know it is possible in hospital settings as well, where women are making good choices and we have people around who know to respect that space. But with the joys of that, then, of course, home birth, then for my third baby as well. But in between time what with all of that, when I came back to Australia before my second baby, so before that first home birth for me, again, well, you two probably are aware of this anyway. I think you're, Bridget, or your little one, just 2, I think you're saying. So you're sort of still a little bit in that, early mothering phase. Julie, I'm not sure how old your little.
I have 4, Rhea. Oh. My number 4 is just turned 3, so she's little too.
It's still 2 littlest. Anyway, that time when, you're in those friendship circles where it's like a sisterhood of new mums and having babies and being around babies. So I was invited by one of my friends who had a birth centre birth for her first baby, travelled down from Darwin to be in a birth centre here in Melbourne, because that the word on the ground was that was the best place to give birth in Australia, was the Queen Vic Birth Centre way back then. So she was having a home birth for her second baby. And, of course, you need somebody to be looking after the toddler, who was 18 months or something at that point. And so I was called in with my small daughter to look after the toddler while the birth was going on. Well, you know what those second babies often do? They don't really care about what the rules and regulations and how the timing should go. They're just on their way. So that second baby just came belting out and somebody had to catch it, and it was me. So that was an initiation of, and then as it happened, not by any design, but just in this sort of network that was around the home birth scene, that happened 2 more times before I'd had my own first home birth, because of being at those second baby home births, and the baby just, and the GP doctor who at that point was supporting home births here in Melbourne, just wasn't making it, until he arrived a little bit after. So pretty much that was a initiation, like I was going to say unconscious. It was unconscious. It was unplanned, certainly an unplanned initiation. I wasn't looking for those gifts. They just were coming out of those sort of networks of how it was working at that point. It was the 70s, right? Remember, well, you maybe don't remember, but it was the 70s. We're much more caring and sharing and sort of work in groups and not so isolated with one another. So all of that sort of brought those gifts to me of being involved in births like that without any intention. But then again, back in those days, if you'd been at a few home births, well, then you were considered to be experienced. So then you'd be invited to other home births. So those ones I went to were really more about being friends with those women, but then it became, all right, okay, well, you come to be at my birth. So it was just like a expanding, organic unfolding into home births there.
What did you learn from witnessing birth that I just wonder, what do you learn when you go to birth and you watch births that you don't learn just by having your own births? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's got to be a change between you've birthed one child, you've had 3 incredible experiences of other women birthing before you come to having your second. Like, how does that change you or inform you?
Yeah. So I guess somewhere, and that's a great question, thank you, to reflect on. Because as I said, in the first instance, that for me to choose a home birth for my second baby, as I said, was more of a running away from what I didn't want to deal with or didn't feel like I would be able to deal with if going back into the hospital, rather than a running towards a particular experience that I knew could be possible. But here in these home births, of course, I'm seeing this experience. So that started to shape that. I guess it also shaped something about how different second babies could be to first babies and so on. So that gave me a lovely platform to feel, to reclaim, I think, something about feeling that I did have a strong body and I could work with my body and I did know my body. So they were sort of just those simple everyday gifts of just something working the way it's sort of designed to work without really interference in it and all. I guess that was the foundation of trust and the foundation of saying, well, there's a bigger picture here. But also in that era of early reclaiming of home births, the Americans wrote about it. Ina May's beautiful book wrote about those stories, but you've just got to think to translate that sort of stuff. Well, there were communes. I wasn't involved in a commune. It was just happening in suburban Melbourne. But some of those same ideas, that organic sort of starting to grow into understanding about birth, that was happening here as well. That reclaiming of birth through the home birth, through reclaiming home birth was happening here in Australia as it was in America. Some countries, of course, like England, have had a continuous history of home birth, which in those situations means that home birth is not as marginalised as it is here, but it's like home birth. It's gotten linked in so much with that 70s hippie stuff or what have you, which is a pity because just staid old grandmothers like me, we still believe in home birth, and not because it's a hippie thing, but anyway, so that was all happening. So I feel, in answer to your question, I've gone a little bit here and there, but it certainly helped me to feel like, this isn't just that I'm protecting that. This is really something about being able to be fully in myself and make choices myself,
How did you become a doula? I don't think I know that.
Well, first of all, the word doula wasn't around.
What did you call yourself?
We called ourselves either the witches.
So great.
Here in Melbourne, who were involved in home births. There's a parallel story which maybe I'll pop into later, but just to follow this thread. So we called ourselves the witches, or other people did. We didn't mind it. We liked it. Or we called ourselves sometimes lay midwives, because at that point in the early time with home births here, there weren't, in the main in Australia, there weren't medically trained midwives, because to be midwives back then, you did nursing, and then was 3 years of that, then you trained as a nurse, and then you did your midwifery. So there wasn't direct entry midwifery in the way that we have in small pockets now. So around the home birth scene, there were GPs who were working in the home birth scene, a few of them, and then there were sort of women like me and others who sometimes we called ourselves lay midwives. So we were with the women across the time of the labour, and the GPs would only come in if we felt there was some problematic, or they would come for the birth. Over time, of course, more hospital-trained or medically trained midwives then started to come into the home birth scene, and now, of course, we have that very strongly, beautiful midwives who hold both those aspects. So sometimes we called ourselves lay midwives. Sometimes, I guess mainly we called ourselves birth attendants. And I've stayed with that name for a long time, and I think probably, Julie, you were aware back then that I was reluctant to call myself a doula. I still have reluctantly bowed to the reality of the situation that the word doula has sort of really taken that space. So doing that work for quite some years before then doula was applied to this work, as it was happening in America in particular. And so then now I might sometimes still, if somebody asks me what I do, I'll say I'm a childbirth educator and I attend births, or a birth attender, and they ask me, oh, you're a doula then, are you?
So when did it become, in essence, a career move, or something more than I'm going to pop to my friend's birth because I love her? When did it become something more than that?
Again, a great question. Just to ask that for me personally, it didn't really... So there has been a big change in terms of that. But to go back to where I started, and the other witches, some of who sadly have passed on now, but a few of them are still around, it was part of... It wasn't like it was a career, and it certainly wasn't a career in any business sense. It was like being of service to your community. And the community was... in particular the home birth community, not entirely, because there's a parallel thing running along, which I mentioned. So quite soon there, I became a childbirth educator with the Childbirth Education Association here in Melbourne, which was quite a radical bunch of women doing brilliant stuff. And so that also meant you were dealing with women who were making choices into the birth centres, into the hospitals, and again were being invited into those births. But it was still... So it was more out of this idea that we had some knowledge base or understanding, and people obviously felt some security about, some emotional security about that. And so it was service to the community. So in terms of that shift to as it is now, where it is it's a pathway that it's a
profession.
Yeah. Profession. That happened gradually. I think it happened, I'm going to go off topic. I mean, it is to the point, but it's a bit wider than the birth scene. So again, in, say, childbirth education and doing a lot of that work and being involved in that organisation, women still were more when they're mothers at home. And so that aspect about being volunteers and being involved in this, that and the other, as opposed to as women more went back into the workforce, even with their small children, and then involved with their work and not so much available for doing that volunteer work. It's a wider picture, a wider social picture that is talked about in a whole lot of areas, not just in this area. But so that was happening. And so then I guess that started to shift this wasn't my experience really so much. I guess if I'm thinking about my career at that professional level and money being part of that, then my pathway as a childbirth educator, that was that pathway, not my attending births, although those obviously went sort of hand in hand in a way. But that aspect of women, that's starting to shift to more of a normalising of women mothering as well as continuing their professional life, and that being about work in the world, whatever it was they were doing. That was starting to, I guess this is, it could be even as late as the late 80s that this is starting to, mid to late 80s, that's starting to have traction into the world that I was in. Although I don't think, no, probably even later than that, maybe into the early 90s. Still mostly the women who were doing the sort of work that I was doing at that point was really in this idea of service. But there would be a gift, maybe.
Was there an event or a series of experiences in this work for you that were defining moments that lit your passion and lit within you that drive to know that this is your work in the world and that this is your calling? Because, you read your writing now and there's such conviction and depth of knowing. But was there some defining moments back then where you just knew in your cells that this was what you were here to kind of advocate for women and for families?
Yeah. I don't know that there's a defining moment, but one of in terms of that conviction and passion, certainly it's still there. And I feel it even more urgently now I'm a grandmother, and you're looking further into the future when you're a grandmother. So I have a lot of passion about that and some distress about that fuels that passion. So this didn't happen as a sort of a lightning bolt. It happened over a little bit of time. And again, just drawing in that. So remember the phys ed teacher, yeah? She's still here alive and well. The physical outdoor adventure facilitator of women, well, not only women, but people using their bodies to take on challenges and to be challenged by their bodies as they're taking on challenges and to be supported to work strongly with their bodies. So, this is around the issues of pain, functional physiological pain, that most sort of physical challenges have some part of. So that's still alive in me. And then because of when I came into the birth scene, not only me but others, we had the privilege, and because I was around the home birth scene as well, but the birth centres and so on, I had the privilege over and over and over and over again of seeing normal physiological childbirth. We didn't call it that then. We didn't call it that. We talked about natural birth, I guess. Mainly we didn't even know really what the hormone, that information now about the hormones, darling Sarah Buckley and Kirsten Moberg and others, so much more about the hormones. And the hormones give us the template about what's happening. We were seeing it from the outside, so we were seeing all these normal physiological childbirths. I guess we called them just normal birth back then, or natural birth. Then in the mid to late 80s, epidurals. The fucking epidural.
I was going to say, go ahead and swear if you want to, because we're cool with that on this podcast. Very cool.
We're an explicit podcast.
Epidural. So the epidurals started to come in, and they came in like pretty well most intervention in birth, or probably in other areas of health, they come in the first place as something that's designed for a specific medical need. Brilliant. And so the epidurals, when they came in, I remember one birth I was at, and the baby was really in a very difficult position. And it was a home birth, and the second baby actually, so we were thinking it would go straight forward, but it was a very, very difficult birth, and the mum was struggling, and we transferred to hospital, and she had an epidural, and it worked beautifully for that birth. So, yeah, fantastic epidural. So we welcomed them in. I now sort of feel like I need to bow down in front of generations and ask forgiveness that we did not have the foresight to understand what would happen. So we're going to start crying if we're not careful here.
I mean, that's passion though, isn't it? That's heart and soul. I know I'm here to speak this truth. What is it that when you cast forward, when you're feeling into that and you're going, we did not know and we could not foresee, what is it that you didn't know and couldn't foresee?
So what we didn't know and couldn't foresee was that, of course, that fucking epidural hijacks now. It's really, I call the epidural now the Trojan horse in the birth space. We thought it was a gift. Little did we know that, like the Greeks, that the soldiers would come over and come out and steal the city. So the epidural has changed the cultural mindset, changed the individual and personal mindset of women to a point now where we, as a culture, demonize labour pain. We demonize it, and we pity women that they should have to engage, and that this is possible. And the epidural is at the heart of that. So, but not only that. I mean, because the natural birth process was around trying to claim birth back away from pethidine being used regularly, or chloroform back in the days when I was born, my mum, so the Achilles heel of women in birth is pain always, and I think there's always been this sort of thing, we should save women from this pain. It's a whole much more complex. But the epidural does it so perfectly in a way. But the other drugs that have been used across the time didn't change birth physiology. The epidural changes birth physiology. So it's not only that we're missing with the epidural use, that we're missing the uplift that we know can happen with that normal physiological childbirth and all those hormones are pumping and working so beautifully. That's another whole story to talk about. Not only that, but the epidural changed the hormonal cocktail that's in the mother, then it actually hijacks the birth process. So then we have to go in and save the babies. Now, one of the things I'm passionate about is and in the second book I try and talk about this, and hopefully it can become clear, because any woman coming to birth now knows epidurals exist. And no matter how committed she is about the sort of birth that she wants, in her brain, she knows there's an epidural, and she knows it could create a situation where she's pain-free. So it's so seductive and so easy to get. So there's that. And so there's that message about, well, they can be pain-free, and it can be, it can be just chatting with your partner. And now we're getting research that partners feel more satisfied with the birth when the woman is on an epidural. So, it's lost now. I think that's why I'm so passionate, because they can just stay in their normal everyday chat with one another, watch some telly while all this process is going on. But this process then doesn't go on. It needs to be, it needs all the other interventions to create it to go on. So women are sold that thing about the epidural, it's so brilliant. And I think if you read my first book, I start to talk about my hairdresser, my beautiful hairdresser I haven't seen for a while, who a young woman, and just anyway, the bit of a chat, and we got talking about birth. And she said, oh, yeah, my friends and I, she doesn't have any kids, but my friends and I, we talk about that, and we know, well, the epidural, that's the thing to do. You just can't give birth without an epidural, can you? She's just saying to me, and I'm like, what? So that is a mindset for the new generation of women coming through. I'm sure not.
How do you roll with that mindset? Like, what do you think about that? How would you try and say to someone who's like, oh, well, that sounds like the worst idea in the entire world. I don't want to, like, be in pain and wailing or, you know, defecating myself. Let's just keep it neat and tidy. And I think that sounds marvelous. Why would you choose something different?
Exactly. That's exactly how it is.
Yeah. What do you think about that? How do you respond to that?
So I then respond to that. And so then this is the point that I'm wanting to make. So women know that. And so then around midwifery, it's they talk about, well, for midwives and or people like me who are interested in facilitating and talking about normal physiological childbirth, and that means working with pain, that we're sort of medieval. You know, the modern way of birth is an epidural. Except that the same women, what women are also hearing about is all of the births with all of the intervention. You know, and they had to save the baby, and the baby had to go to special care, and they had to do the forceps, and thank goodness I was there, and they did the Caesar, and thank goodness, all of that, without understanding that those two things, the pain-free, what the epidural does, is entirely, in most cases, the kernel of what then transpires in terms of where we then have to save the baby. We have to make the body work through other intervention. We have to get the baby out. We have to save the baby. Sometimes we have to save the mum. And they are part of a continuum that starts with the epidural and ends with all of those high intervention rates. So women are getting both of those messages that birth doesn't work, that women's bodies don't work. We need this intervention and that intervention and the other intervention to save them and make them all okay. They get that message. So therefore, fear. Birth is so dangerous. My baby's in peril. My body doesn't work, so on. All of that out of that end of the deal. They get the message that the epidural is so brilliant. It's such a good friend to you because you can be pain-free while all that's happening, without knowing that those two absolutely collide, that cascade. We talk about that cascade of interventions, and there are a few points at which that cascade of interventions can start, but the key point that it starts in modern birthing is with the epidural. So to answer your question, so I'm just talking up this fact so much. And then the other thing to talk up is, of course, the beauty of those hormones. The beauty of those hormones, the important role that the functional physiological pain in childbirth, the important role it has in tipping over the sort of endorphin system that then plays in with the oxytocin system to drive the contractions. And those two together, when those moments happen, the endorphins swamp the cerebral cortex, this brilliant contemporary 21st century thinking brain that is on, across so much, but swamp the cerebral cortex so that the hormones work, and the primal brain, the mammalian brain, the primal brain stem that knows about birthing starts to come into play. There's a whole brainwave shift that happens, so the mother's brainwaves shift back to be in sync with her baby's brainwave, so they're in communication at that very deep level. So we then get the instincts unfolding and that connection at that deep level. So, this is the mystery and beauty that the epidural robs us of. And, there's a bit of pain to actually get to that point where that starts to, the dysfunctional physiological pain. It's the pain that you would welcome if you're running a fun run. It's not all fun running a fun run, but a lot of people do it because they like the challenge of it, and they know they might need a bit of support, and they want to be with people who are doing it. So there's a whole lot of factors around that whole idea of working with the functional physiological pain of childbirth and the payoff in terms of the hormones. It's not a story. Well, unless you're involved in a certain way of thinking about birth, you're probably not engaged with that sort of story. And far from that, even the other thing that happens around pain, apart from, because the epidural can create a pain-free situation, it lessens the pain tolerance of all birthing women, because they know they could be pain-free at this point. So it's like the point at which you feel like it's too much is happening much, much earlier in the labour. There's that. The other thing is, because 97% of births happen in hospitals, and hospitals are a place where, in the main, the things that happen in hospitals are illness, disease, danger, damage, injury, accidents, things going wrong in the body. that are painful, coming out of pathological pain of your body not working or things going wrong with it or being injured. And in hospital, rightly, we have a whole swathe of pain relief medications and a whole pain relief philosophy, which is entirely appropriate for situations where your body is in trouble, things going wrong, to give you some relief so that your healing capacity can come forward. That's a very, very different story to placing birth. But because we place birth in hospitals, that sort of is a very blurred mindset. And certainly separate to whether it's a blurred mindset in the mother that I'm feeling pain. A lot of people, women in labour and their partners particularly think, well, there must be something going wrong and the pain is getting worse, i.e. actually the birth is getting better and better and better as it gets stronger and stronger. But that pain is getting worse, and there must be something terrible going wrong because this blending of, that intensity of the labour being placed in the hospital, then it feels like in any case in a hospital where the pain is getting worse and worse and worse about pathological pain, it's a danger signal, not in birth. Mm-hmm. But it's so blurred, or all of that is so blurred. So these are important things to try and get across, and to know how to support women that working with pain, to support them. I reckon
be able to do that.
Yes, I reckon if we did more births in yoga studios or even in the weights room at the gym, if you don't want to have your baby at home, have it in the weights room of the gym. That would change people's attitude about the actual physiological pain and the effort required, and celebrate it rather than be thinking, oh, poor thing, it's so terrible.
That
so
true. Is so powerful, isn't it? Because you're exactly right that even when you equate birth with a hospital, even if you're not conscious of it, there is that alignment between sickness, pain, taking away the pain, scary, all of those things come into it.
Yeah.
Instead of it being purposeful.
Exactly.
So one of the things I want to ask you, Rhea, is your latest book is called Beyond the Birth Plan.
Yeah.
What does that mean, to go beyond a birth plan?
Yeah. So I guess we were thinking about it like when we were coming up with the title. This is one of the hardest things to do for a book. I guess it's like babies' names, Quite hard. The passionate ones. Just a little secret, it's probably not such a secret, between you and the viewers or the listeners. I wanted to call the book The Fucking Epidural, but nobody else was on board.
No one else rolled with that.
I particularly wanted to have a secret subheading for chapter 1, which is really The Fucking Epidural, but it's none of those things are there. But if you had did you ever do magic writing when you were kids, and
now there's like invisible pens, they're like all the rage too. Yeah.
Read that book. I'll have to get an invisible pen and go.
Yeah.
But coming away from that, so beyond the birth plan. So it was that thing coming out of, I guess, a lot now of the stories and the understanding, putting together, naming obstetric violence, with obstetric violence being on a sort of a range of not honouring women's autonomy, disregarding their options and choices, through to intimidation, through to bullying, through to, in some cases, physical assault. Yeah. So there's that, honouring that or understanding that as being recognised now. There's also the thing, particularly of women who are a bit savvy, who understand that what they're wanting for the birth isn't necessarily the default setting in the birth culture. And so then they feel like, well, if I do my birth plan, put a lot of attention to the birth plan, that will make it all okay. But in some settings, that will be, the birth plan will be honoured and respected, and if you've chosen well in terms of having a birth setting that suits the sort of birth that you're wanting, then that's just a beautiful conversation starter about how we'll all work towards what you're wanting. But sometimes a birth plan is a red rag to a bull in settings where it's much more of a hierarchical power over situation. But the mother sort of feels like if she's got that birth plan, that's going to be enough to make it all turn out okay. No. So beyond the birth plan is the idea of really having to be just let me pause there. I want to step back a little bit and say something else, and I'll come back to it. The birth culture is changing. There's so much research now that's talking about lots of things that are happening in the birth culture at a routine level now, all pretty much debunked. The research is coming from the World Health Organization, it's coming from major, the Lancet Journal, a whole lot of research. I've got it all in the book. But for big systems to change, even though there is research to say that they should and they must, that process of, the research coming in, and particularly in hierarchical organizations, for the research to come in, first of all, is going to be picked up by the sort of who's on the top of the hierarchy, i.e. in this case, obstetric bodies. They've got to take it on board. Then it's got to filter down. So before it becomes practice on the floor in the ward, they say it's somewhere between 8 and 15 years. Well, the mum who's giving a baby today, she can't wait for that whole system to change. So we need, yes, that sort of research that it does make those changes, but we need to try and speed that process up. And one of the ways of doing that is for women to be savvy, my language, to be savvy about, in particular, normal physiological childbirth. No, it's not really on offer in most of the hospital situations, and to do their own work about that in terms of the choices they're making, but so that we're making the demands from within the hierarchy, sort of from the bottom, to shorten that timeline. But also they've got to make choices where they know their birth plan will be honoured. Now, that's mainly going to be with midwifery care, and in particular to be attuning to the continuity of midwifery care, which is gold standard across the world for normal physiological childbirth. In Australia, only 8% of women can access it, so there's a lot of work to be done to change systems around that. So the Beyond the Birth Plan is laying out those things, but then also the other work, the deeper work that women need to do, is to look at who they are, what their life story is, and how that meets birth and how that meets the birth culture. In particular, how it meets the birth culture, which is not necessarily at this point, and I don't think they're going to wait another 8 years till the next baby comes, is not attuned to some of these realities. Yes. So one of the things I hope that I've been able to do in that book, and we really work so much around the language, because, without understanding this context, some of the things that I'm writing about in that book can maybe feel like I'm blaming women, I haven't sorted this out, I haven't sorted that out, I haven't sorted the other thing out. I'm not blaming women. I'm seeing that most women in their births are being let down by a birth culture that is not really attuned to what their needs are or what their baby's needs are. But it's not going to change. It is changing, but it's not going to change in time for you, pregnant now, having your baby. So then what happens in that birth culture is any vulnerability, just any sort of psychological, emotional vulnerability, let alone any sort of deep life wounds that some of us carry, they will be triggered. They get triggered in that birth space, and unless women are aware of doing that work themselves and feeling that they're making choices with people who know how to hold them in that and to hold them in the work of the birth as well, these are the women who come out with, birth trauma, some of them post-traumatic stress disorder and so on, because it's like in a way, the birth culture, it shifts around the edges, but it's like an immovable
beast. I have a few questions there that I want to come back to, but one that I just wanted to touch on while we were looking at your title of Beyond the Birth Plan is I perceive there's one other group of women who might begin with a birth plan, but then they go to their appointments and like, what do you need a birth plan for? Birth plans are stupid. You don't need a birth plan because birth never goes to plan. So throw that out the window. You just rock up and see what you're up for, and who knows. What do you think about that?
Yes. So this is that thing about having to understand the context. Yes? that's exactly the argument against birth plans. And so I address that too, which is, well, birth is so unpredictable. So unpredictable. Well, in fact, it's not unpredictable. Occasionally, I mean, you will probably know this too, Julie, because you've done a bit of work in the birth scene. But, I mean, if any woman tells me what hospital they're going to, I can predict exactly what the birth will be. Separate to what she thinks the birth is going to be or what her birth plan says or what have you. It's entirely predictable.
Very sad, but true. I often find myself saying to women, you know, it's a lot like when you go and interview primary schools and you say, oh, my child's so special and here's what they need. And they say, oh, yes, we can meet every need of that. But the reality is very different.
Yeah. So birth, they can say to women that birth is unpredictable, but in fact, pretty much the machine of the hospital knows how predictable that birth is going to be in terms of the style of birth that happens in that place. So this is part of an education, you know, Childbirth Educator in me. And it's partly both the books are around that, trying to dismantle some of that so that women understand what is actually going on, what they need in that birth culture, that they need to be, if they want to protect something about their birthing capacity, that they need to be savvy about where they're placing themselves and not just front up anywhere. It's tricky because, you know, women are zoned to this hospital rather than that one. In the olden days, you know, a few of the hospitals were just the birth centres were much better for all of this, and women could go from anywhere to go to the birth centre. But that's not possible now, so
I know
about how some of those things happen. Yeah.
I have one other juicy question that I did want to come back to, so I was really grateful actually that you brought it up, which was the topic of obstetric violence. Do you mind if we just circle back there for a little bit? So I find this a very socially taboo topic to even be discussing now. And yet birth workers like you and I and savvy mums like Bridget, who are aware of the culture and the environment and make choices in alignment with their own needs based on those knowings, know that it's a reality. I consult with women every week who are experiencing post-traumatic something from incidences that are considered normal. So I just wondered if you could I would just love to hear more of your wisdom on it, because it is such a contentious and difficult to broach topic.
Yeah. So I want to just step back and take a wider view. This is the way that I deal with it in my workshops and classes, and I've talked in the book, I talk about it like this as well. I want you to imagine my PowerPoint slide that I use when I'm talking about these issues. It's a slide that's sort of got 4 quadrants in it. And the top 2 quadrants, so the top 2 quadrants represent the caregivers. No, let's say the right-hand side, the top and the bottom, represent caregivers. The left-hand side, which I'm dyslexic, right, left, I don't know, but, you know.
Doesn't matter. One side, the other side.
Represents the birthing woman, so the top and the bottom. So then the top 2, we've got the caregivers and the birthing woman. And the old paradigm, I guess, is based around that idea that a lot of people would know as like, well, doctor knows best. Yeah. And doctor knows best can relate to whether it's the doctor, the midwife, the surgeon, the anaesthetist, the whole structure, basically. Yeah, doctor knows best. And the perfect match for that paradigm is, in our case, the birthing woman who acquiesces to that authority. So I talk about this as the trance of acquiescence. Many of us still going separate to even birth when we go into hospital, we go into a trance of acquiescence, or a doctor's room or a medico's room about, okay, they know best.
Can I just ask you about that in your book? Is that what you refer to as the hospital is not a good parent, or is that sort of slightly aside from that?
That's part of it. It's a bit of a deeper, well, it's a bit broader, but it's part of this. So that in that setting, you've got medicos, or, you know, the caregivers who feel like they know best, they have the knowledge and they know all of this, and they're working with the patient, in our case, the birthing woman, who feels like, yes, well, you know best, you tell me what to do. So they're acquiescing. So that can be a harmonious set of interactions. In the birth culture, though, what that means is very high intervention rates. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's harmonious. And certainly there'd be no tension probably between the caregiver and the woman. But we have a new paradigm. This is probably wider than the social thinking and what have you. But the new paradigm, which is the bottom two quadrants, we've still got the caregiver and the mother. The new paradigm is based on respectful care, patient-centered care in medicine more broadly, or women-centered care in terms of pregnancy and birth. And this paradigm is premised around, from the point of view of the caregiver, that yes, they have knowledge, but their knowledge needs to be interpreted to this woman in terms of how this is for this particular woman. What are her risk factors? So the research says this, and this. How does that work for you with you and your baby and your belief system and what have you? I'm sharing, the caregiver, I am sharing all this information with you clearly. I'm quantifying it in terms of what I feel like your risk might be in terms of that research. Now I offer you, what do you feel? What do you want to do? This is women-centered care, of respectful care, but it's certainly a sharing of the skills and resources and information that the caregiver has, but it's not a doctor knows best or medicine knows best power over situation. It's a shared care, a shared understanding. I give you my expertise and you have your own expertise and thoughts and feelings and beliefs and what have you, and so we come together at that. The woman in this case, which is a perfect match for that new paradigm, is a woman who is centered within her own autonomy and in her own sense of responsibility. Mm-hmm. So that is a harmonious connection too between the top two paradigms of the older model, the old paradigm. That can be a harmonious. The caregiver and the woman who are working from the new paradigm, that's harmonious. Where we see obstetric violence coming through is where we have a woman her sensibilities are coming from the new paradigm, but she meets in the birth space practitioners who are working from the old paradigm. And so then this becomes a power over and a power struggle and a power, women feel like their autonomy is then being trammeled and not respected. Caregivers probably think as a woman is, not taking enough, she needs to be listening because this is also dangerous and we need to do this, but there's a lot of bullying comes out of that connection. Does that make some sense to you?
It certainly does to me.
Yeah. The other thing I would say in terms of those paradigms is that, so that's not a good match. We've got the woman who is working and expecting from the new paradigm with her birth plan and so on. Mm. But also if we have practitioners, whether that's obstetricians or midwives or within the birth scene. I mean, what I'm describing is not only about in the maternity system. This is more generally about health systems. But if we've got a caregiver who's working from the new paradigm about respect and women-centered or patient-centered care, where you're given the information and then you make your decisions for yourself. If we have that practitioner, but they're working with a patient, or in our case, a pregnant woman who is still working from the old paradigm in terms of acquiescence to somebody who should tell me what to do, then that is not a good match either, and probably not a safe match. Mm. So changing paradigms just more generally takes a long time and a lot of work and a lot of consciousness raising. So we're not there yet. I can see the move, but we're not there yet. So that's one of the things I see happening where we're getting this aspect of obstetric violence. But of course that power over dynamic in hierarchical systems that sit within hospitals and particularly within maternity care. And that feeling of I know best is still alive and strong, really. So, I mean, that sort of trumps even what I'm saying about these shifting paradigm and these quadrants and who's interacting with who. But the other thing I would say in terms of that slide I'm trying to talk about at the moment is that I think that there's also, I mean, it's more commonly called, isn't it, the sort of mummy wars, yeah? Mm-hmm. And I think that certainly, let's stay on the side of this pretend slide that I've got up here, where we've got the caregiver side and we've got the old paradigm caregivers and the new paradigm caregivers. Is not exactly the case, but often this is obstetricians in the old paradigm and midwives in the new paradigm. Mm-hmm. And we know within the hospital systems and the hierarchical power over systems that are still involved in the hospitals, obstetricians exert power over midwives. Mm-hmm. So midwives have their own autonomy, and then we've got feisty, brilliant, beautiful midwives, but they have to work quite hard, let alone to with a mother in the situation, but within the hospital. But also, I think, so we've got on the other side, you know, the in our case, the birthing woman, and we have women who are still working from the old paradigm of that acquiescence. You tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it. My body doesn't work. I don't know my body. You know, it's not my thing. It's something you have to do to me. And so they're acquiescent. They end up with those high intervention rates. Mm. Come out feeling birth is so dangerous. And thank God I was, the thank goodness birth. Thank goodness I was there and I could have my baby or I could take me. So there's those women. I think probably still that's a majority, unfortunately, shifting. And then we have the women who are working from the new paradigm. But I think that some of those mummy wars are coming out of that discrepancy in the base of where women are coming from in terms of what they're wanting out of this birth experience. So that, fighting with one another, or the woman from the older paradigm who ends up with a difficult birth experience and then tells the woman who's worked so hard to have the birth that she wanted and made particular choices that are really not socially acceptable or that people give her a lot of grief for, and then they meet one another and she's told, oh, well, you were just lucky that happened, or, or this, or, there's a whole lot of place where those groups of women are unable to see that, in fact, this isn't about a woman-to-woman story. It's a much bigger
cultural context.
Structural and cultural context. So it's a beautiful slide, that one. When I use that, even I get to talk to obstetricians these days, and when I use that one, they have some interesting conversations with me after that. So I'm loving that.
That sounds amazing. Can I just ask still on that, what do you classify as punitive behaviour, or what do you perceive would classify as obstetric violence or abuse? What's the spectrum?
Yeah. Well, I mean, disrespect for birth plans, you take your birth in and you I can't say any of these things so simply because they've all got a background.
And you're a storyteller. I don't imagine there's ever a one-word answer.
So a woman, the birth culture is set up on the model of stranger caregivers. Yeah? So that the woman, so putting aside the private hospital, so that in the private hospital, the private situation, so the woman is making a relationship with the obstetrician, yeah? So that's not a stranger situation, but I think a lot of women think that they're going to be with the obstetrician, going to be with them doing the work.
I know. They invest their money at the wrong end.
So even though they know the obstetrician, they don't know the midwife. No. And the midwife is the one who can be much more impactful and is going to be there for all the hours. So it's premised, as I said, on particularly where we think about midwives, of in the main women dealing with stranger midwives, beautiful midwives, but the midwife doesn't know who the woman is and the woman doesn't know who the midwife is, and they go through 1 or 2 or 3 shifts or something. So it could be, I don't know, they've done some research on that. I should have it in my mind. But a normal first labour going reasonable amount of time can go through something like, because there's dinner breaks, there's lunch breaks, a different one comes in, they can be going through 10 or more different practitioners coming in. So the birth plan is important in that point so that each new person that comes in can be taking on board the birth plan. But going back to your question, I mean, it can be somebody just, I had a look at your birth plan, but look what's happening in your birth now, or just poo-pooing or giving that sort of, oh yeah, or out on the desk, there's conversation about the woman in room 10 who's got a 4-page birth plan and, who the hell does she think she is, and, we know how this is going to work out and blah, blah, blah. So the birth plan is not maybe getting more respected, but it often is not respected. And this is because the hospitals are premised around so much of their routine practice and their way of working. I mean, probably, it's tricky because probably, if we're doing some work or something or other, if I'm running my workshop, which I've been doing for years and years and years, maybe I don't like somebody coming in and, saying, well, could you do this first, not that section, and do this? Maybe I get my back up. We're all human. So, but that can be one of the things about just birth plans. Another can be that idea of abandoning women just to the machines when women need to feel that emotional security. In some hospitals, the culture is within the midwifery field is not to be with women, but to actually be out at the desk. And some midwives tell me, if they go and they want to be with a woman, that when they go back to the desk to check in or what have you, their colleagues are saying, what are you doing with her? Or, she's going to have the epidural soon. It's all a bit of a waste of time. Or so they can be that. So not getting that sort of nurturing care is one aspect. Can also be manhandling women, we need to do this and we need to do that, and it can be like I said with mine, no, we don't do episiotomies routinely, but everybody on the ward had an episiotomy. So either you have to think, well, if that's because they only do them when they're necessary, that means, there's obviously something very wrong with women's bodies that of course, that's not the case. So these are routine situations. So, and sometimes, of course, there's physical assault in terms of, lifting women up. I have not seen these things, but I do far too much birth debriefing and hear these stories that the mother wants to stay, kneeling and whatever, but they're manhandling her up onto the bed or the feet up in stirrups. And so all those things still happen, as well as episiotomy is done or vaginal examinations done without care and strangers coming in, and then the student, and then. So these things are, from the point of view of the practitioners, I'm sure they don't do them with the thoughts. They're being educated as well. If we're all living still in that old paradigm about doctor knows best, well, then you just say yes to whatever, and it's not thought of as being abuse. A bit like the Me Too movement, this putting a different take on behaviours and power systems in all sorts of areas that we've taken for granted. We've known that they haven't quite served certain people, or many, many people, or women in particular in lots of cases, and yet they were sort of just hush-hush and accepted. Well, now we're not accepting. So the conversations about these sort of hidden in plain sight power structures, we might call them all, about patriarchy, not entirely, but that wider context. Well, now they're coming to the fore. The spotlight is on and we're opening up those things. So this is then also showing us in terms of obstetric violence that this is another version of violence against women. And it's being taken up. There's also, I guess, another wider picture is the thing about human rights more generally, and specifically, of course, human rights in childbirth. So this is now coming to the fore. There's legal aspect coming into that as well. So that starts to make change, and it's consciousness raising and awareness. And I'm sure that I know, and I would think that obstetric training now would also be taking on board, not the fact that they're not all men, a lot of women have obstetricians as well, but that obstetric training and certainly midwifery training is now much more around these issues. So we will see a change. It's just that these sort of changes, because they're big structural changes, they're paradigm changes, and they take time. So for this individual woman who's having her baby now, who is attuned to her own needs, and she's got to work a lot harder to find the spaces, the savvy places and spaces, and who to be with her to honour what she's knowing is possible for the birth.
What a beautiful, juicy conversation that we have just had. Part 1 of our interview with Rhea Dempsey, a beautiful matriarch and wise woman. So we would invite you to tune in again next week for part 2. To connect with us, it's nourishingthemother.com.au. To connect with Julie, thepleasurenutritionist.com. Me at suburbansandcastles.com. Remember to nourish the woman to rock the family, and we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
And if you want to support Nourishing the Mother and all the late nights, the early mornings, the blood, sweat and tears we pour into our art, then please go to patreon.com/NTM podcast and become our patron. As a patron, you're helping all of the cost of operating this podcast, the hosting, the editing, the transcription, helping all of that be completely covered, and joining a community who are all about honouring our journeys and continuing to open. The more support we have, the longer we can last. So become a patron. We'd love to have you. Go to patreon.com/NTM podcast. We literally couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for listening, and please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.